As many. The chair recognizes Honourable Member for Fox Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I take it that the bottom line of the contribution of the member for East Grand Bahama is to eliminate ministries or eliminate ministers and the ministries with them, which will mean laying off civil servants. So that's his solution to the economic issue, is laying off civil servants. I just want to get clear.
Point of order. The chair recognizes the member for East Grand Bahama.
I did not say, and I think he should withdraw the suggestion that I said that we should get rid of civil service, Mr. Speaker. Now, if he wants to ask me what I meant by that, he can ask me that question, and I will be glad to give it to him, the answer to it. But that's not what I said, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Fox Hill.
Yes, reasonable minds would just want to inquire what you meant by the elimination of ministers. Because the elimination of ministers means the elimination of ministries, followed by the people who work for those ministries. So it follows, rationally, logically, that you mean to lay off civil servants as a solution to the economic problems. Yes, I only wanted to be clear. And then, Mr. Speaker, you know, all of this stuff about...
Member for Fox Hill, you're making your contribution now. This is your contribution.
I've begun.
Yes, very well.
Right. I've begun. All of this stuff, forgive the colloquialism, about value-added tax, as if suddenly we invented this tax out of the blue and it dropped out from the sky and the doom and gloom and the country is going to collapse because of VAT. There's nothing ingenious about VAT. Nothing new in the world that we know of. And we have a set of bad choices. Now, in terms of developing the policy on this, there was a time when a Minister of Finance was going to introduce a tax. He never used to talk about it at all. He just implemented the tax because he knew the more you talk about the tax, the more people start to evade and duck. And now I'm told that somebody is saying when you go in the grocery store, the prices already got VAT added in it, jacking up the prices. So I'm wondering whether we shouldn't cut this whole debate short, and if the Minister of Finance says, this is what we need to do, then we should just do it. And then we rise or fall on it. And you certainly, Mr. Speaker, you certainly can't depend on the usual suspects who come and oppose everything that the Progressive Liberal Party does for advice on this subject or any subject.
That's right.
Yeah, him too. I hadn't thought of him. But I was talking about the man who washes clothes, who has an opinion on everything. Has an opinion on everything. Just stick a microphone in front of his face and he's got a word to say on it. Now, in this climate, I call no name, in this climate now, last year, the government comes with a raft of measures to try and deal with this financial problem that the Bahamas government has running this country. And all the doom and gloom that came back was how the sky was going to fall in and these taxes were going to stop this and so on and so forth. And then last week, what did I read in the newspaper? Or was it this week? Commonwealth Bank announces that they made the third highest profit in their history, $51 million that they're going to share. $51 million they're going to give to their shareholders. So, yeah, Bahamians, but... Well, you know, what I'm saying, though, is this is in a tax climate which was supposed to cause everything to collapse. Obviously, the taxes didn't injure Commonwealth Bank.
No.
Obviously, didn't injure Commonwealth Bank.
No.
And, yes, I mean, they have Finco's, I got a nice dividend check from Finco. Despite all the doom and gloom and the taxes and so on and so forth that was going to run everybody out of business. Now, we're going to come to the downsizing. We'll come to that part later. come to that part later. My point is that the tax policies have clearly not negatively affected the development of this economy.
No.
The facts demonstrate that. The facts demonstrate that. So you have to be careful when you listen to people who are wealthy and growing richer by the day. From the time these tax policies came in, they've done very well, thank you very much, prescribing to poorer people that they must not support the government because of these tax policies. They don't. You have to ask yourself, do they really care about these poor people that they're talking about?
Only what they could get from them.
Be very careful how you take advice. So, Mr. Speaker, I remember, and you know, I want to talk a bit nearer the end about the Bank of the Bahamas and this apparent attack on the Bank of the Bahamas in conspiracy with these newspapers, it appears, to run this bank out of business for God knows why. But there was a time, I'm advised, when the same Commonwealth Bank that is doing so very well, thank you very much, the central bank had to help it out in its history. Banks go through these issues. Finco didn't pay dividends for 2 years, trying to tidy up the books, and now is paying a dividend again. But everybody suddenly, because the Bank of the Bahamas has a loss, the first loss in its history, in the history of the bank, it now says that the bank is unsafe, and then there's constant assault every day about loans to PLPs, and when you look at the loan portfolios they're talking about, they're probably done during the period when the F&M was the government. So we didn't have anything to do with giving the loans. Your fellas had it leaked all over the newspapers. You said it was PLPs. Say it was PLPs.
Good Lord.
PLPs.
Good Lord, you ain't asked for bank secrecy.
Members.
No. I attended a seminar last night. The deputy leader for the F&M was there as well, organized by Kyle Joaquin. Impressive array of young people talking about cybersecurity. And the data commissioner was there, and she gave a nice talk about how we must be, you know, we must know what the law is and so on and so forth. But the first thing I thought about is, you know, someone needed to exercise some cybersecurity on the people who run that newspaper. Let's put all these people's business in the public domain, probably contrary to law. And nobody seems to be concerned about that at all. I was talking to my colleagues downstairs about this, and you know, on the old-fashioned, the analog technology. We were talking about protection of privacy and reporters who call you up and they're talking to you, and I don't know. You know, I was trained as a reporter, and one of the things they always said is that you're supposed, well, the one that gets me is you're supposed to write, well, this is how I was trained to write, an upside-down pyramid. And the first paragraph should say who, what, when, or why. You can read a story today, and it doesn't tell you where the person spoke, when they spoke, and why they spoke at all. They just start speaking. But the point I was getting at with this security is how they call you up on the phone. They're talking to you, hi, how you doing, so on and so forth. And you think you're having a conversation with them. The next thing you know, it's in the newspaper. Nothing about, I'm recording you. I'm speaking to you on the record. No distinction between this and that. Nothing. Just, yeah. I guess that's the modern way. You know, I don't mind talking to them because as I said to the party whip downstairs, you know, don't make me no, never mind. I say whatever, you know, I want. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said it like that, but don't make me no, never mind at all. I say the first thing that comes to my mind, I don't care. Don't like it, too bad. So, yeah, and the thing about it, yeah, on the way out. So you know, yeah, you know, and. No, well, I don't know who he was talking to. He may have been talking for me. He may have been my surrogate.
He was over there before.
But, you know, the point I'm ultimately leading to, Mr. Speaker, is several of my friends have become quite worried in recent days about these headlines in the newspaper about what I said down in Trinidad. And I want to address that. The first thing I want to say about that, though, is don't be scared for me. People can't do me nothing. Absolutely nothing. Don't be scared for me. Don't be concerned for me at all. Don't worry about it. You know, the facts will speak for themselves, and the principles will stand up for themselves. And if the principles are sound, doesn't matter what the assault is. If the principles are sound, they're sound. And we stand or fall on that. So come to that later as well. I want to just say the Fox Hill people are still in mourning over the loss of those 4 citizens of Fox Hill who died tragically on the 27th of December on the Freedom Park. And to express our thanks to the community of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas as a whole for all of the support which they have extended to the families of those deceased Fox Hillians. And a couple of days ago, the community is in the midst of a healing exercise, and the government has put some resources in there to try and clean the place up a bit more. But a couple of days ago, as people thought this matter was all coming to rest, through the very same Dorset Street which started this whole matter on the 25th of December last year, another young man was shot, I'm told, to the head and to the body, and is now in a hospital in Dorset Street. Again, nobody's seen nothing. And again, the police suspect that this is a situation of tit for tat. And public officials are struggling, and the community is struggling about what do we do to actually bring this to a halt. So it's not over. So this evening there's supposed to be a community meeting, because I want to talk to the community about what we do on the way forward. One, about the completion of the community center in Fox Hill, which has been outstanding for some time. Secondly, about the kind of memorial we'll put up on Freedom Park for the 4 deceased persons. And then more generally, what we're going to do to try and solve the broader community problems. And there are a host of them, but I do believe that the way to fix these problems must be social intervention of some kind. I've said often in this place that that is why I spend so much time with the kids at the Sandlands Primary School, because I believe that if you get to the kids at that age and they get a good grounding, that ever after you could save some. So I think that that is important, and I just wanted to thank again the community for their assistance. So in rising, Mr. Speaker, to support the 2 bills before the House, the Tariff Act and the Excise Tax Act, I just wanted to thank the Right Honourable Member for Centerville for his stellar work in crafting and presenting this budget statement. And I want to commend the work of the Honourable Member for Golden Isles for his work in the trenches with the team at Finance so that we can continue to make the mortgage payments and buy the groceries. And I use that analogy because I think it's an apt analogy of using the household budget of a family, trying to match our pennies to supply the family needs. As my deceased mother used to say, people seem to think that money grows on trees, despite the well-publicized fiscal challenges which the country has. Now, we have a collegial style of government, and notwithstanding the way the form takes place, of course, the power is often centralized in and around the Ministry of Finance and the Office of Prime Minister. If you look at the budget book, at what monies are available to us, my advice is, Mr. Speaker, that we have stayed within those figures which the government advanced to us by way of those figures last year when we were debating the budget, including what I'm told is a 12% holdback on certain items, save for repatriation and personal emoluments in a cost-saving measure. In that regard, therefore, there's nothing actually unusual to report about spending. And I say that because every so often what crops up in the newspaper is this tremendous travel budget that the Minister of Foreign Affairs apparently has at his disposal, which has him up and down all over the world and supposedly not paying attention to the duties of Minister of Foreign Affairs, even though intrinsic in the name Foreign Affairs is foreign affairs and not domestic affairs. And it would seem to follow from that you got to be away if you are going to deal with foreign affairs. But we won't quarrel over small points. This has been a challenging environment in which to work. And we've been able, Mr. Speaker, to do more with less, and we've been able to take additional foreign service officers and protocol staff, which have augmented the staff which we have had. And this has enlivened the ministry's ability to carry out its mission. So I want to thank the Ministry of Finance for being able to provide the resources. Last Sunday, while I was putting this together, I was trying to find out, Mr. Speaker, and this may be apropos of something the member for Golden Isles was saying earlier about repeating and repeating. I was trying to find out who won the Hart Award at the Sir Victor Sassoon Foundation's Hardball. Now, the pictures show that many persons of quality were at this ball. Some were members of my own family. And I simply wanted to know who had won. And each person that I asked, who won the Hart Foundation Award? Not one person could tell me the name. They had attended. And presumably this was the centerpiece of the whole ball. And you would have thought that all those there would have remembered. But clearly there were other priorities. As it turns out, the winner was Sheila Farrington Pritchard, a woman who I'm told specializes in special education, and I want to congratulate her for her victory, or for her award. However, the moral of the story is not the well-deserved winner, but it reminded me of what I've been told by two experts in marketing and opinion research and political consultation, that we should not assume that the general public has the same interest in political matters that we in politics have. That most people do not pay attention to political matters, and thus you have to repeat the message ad nauseum because it takes a long time for people to get it. That people who follow politics are a small group of people, a minority, and so in that case they are extraordinary. I start there because of this feeding frenzy which has ensued, I'm advised. I got a note just before I came here that I was the subject of commentary on Love 97 over a series of innocuous statements made within the context of an address to the University of the West Indies on the 6th of February. Now, the interesting thing about this country is no one paid any attention to the speech itself at all. Yeah. But somehow, the Nassau Guardian decided to use an excerpt from the address on the question of the rights of LGBT people. And here we go again, off to the races. I say this in the context of this debate because it is important for what the U.S. President, amongst others, have called teachable moments. One remembers Dr. Cleveland Eneas saying, if you want to hide something from a Bahamian, put it in writing. And it appears that this might just apply to the opposition spokesman on foreign affairs, the member for St. Anne's. In the process of this, I would like to say a few things about how I see my role as foreign minister and the execution of that job. In the process, I would like also to tell people how I execute the job in practice. Mr. Speaker, the foreign minister's role, as I see it, is to be the nation's lead diplomat. He is the first, in law, he is the first point of communication with the outside world and this country. And he is responsible for helping to shape the image of the country to the outside world and to relate the policies and programs of the Bahamas to the outside world. He spends much of the time out of the country necessarily on missions large and small. Indeed, I had announced last year that I would be on the road trying to find fresh money for this country. In executing that policy, he is, by the way, matters are established in the Constitution, an agent of the Cabinet, and more particularly the Prime Minister. And notwithstanding the form of government being described as parliamentary, in practice the government operates in a presidential style, and it is so structured. This has evolved over time as various strong personalities have taken or occupied the office of Prime Minister. The degree of collegiality waxes and wanes, with the high point of one-man rule being under Ingram and the more collegial style today being the other part of the scale. Notwithstanding all of that, the execution of any matter by this foreign minister, in the execution of any policy by this foreign minister, I always check with home first.
Okay.
Check with home first. It is therefore, Mr. Speaker, inconceivable that this minister would break new ground in any policy without being firmly planted either in our party's platform or in the established policies of the Cabinet or the sign-off, if not the actual knowledge of the head of government. I said to one of my colleagues yesterday, I'm going to give a speech in this country one day, and I'm going to title it, I Speak Greek. Because no matter how much I say this, no matter how much I say this, no matter how the facts show it, there are those who oppose to us, and I want to be more candid perhaps and say those who oppose to me, who simply will try to describe it in some other way, as if there's some maverick politician out there on a frolic of his own. It is simply not my fault, Mr. Speaker, if you can't read and comprehend what is in plain sight. So, for example, in the work on the address on CARICOM called Saving CARICOM, that's the name of the address, Saving CARICOM, delivered at the Institute of International Relations of the University of the West Indies on the 6th of February, I spoke, not as Fred Mitchell individually, but as the Prime Minister of the Bahamas. It was part of my role to show how the Bahamas relates in the CARICOM region and what it sees for the organization. The speech is largely descriptive and in some measure prescriptive, but in fact breaks no new ground. So it is a little confusing for the opposition spokesman to say what he said. Our philosophy of seamless passage around the world is what I've said I believe the role of the foreign minister is, or the foreign ministry is, and our foreign policy is, to create a seamless experience for Bahamians around the world, whether they travel as tourists or they travel as business people, winning friends and influencing people. It's about image making. I've said before that in our foreign policy, we want to ensure this seamless experience, and as minister, I continue to work toward that end. In doing so, we want to be sure that people understand where we are and understand where they are. It's my judgment that the Bahamas is a liberal democracy in a secular state. Religion is a right of all, and so are our moral choices. We have an abiding respect for Christian values and the rule of law. And wherever I go, that is the image I portray. And this country has a good image. And this is so, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the warnings that you see that are posted on some foreign governments' websites about various events which transpire in our country in terms of crime. These governments have a responsibility to their citizens to publish this information and to say that they ought to be careful. But, you know, I've said to many people that if you contrast what happens in Jamaica, where the problem of violence is much more severe than here, they get 2 million tourists a year, 600,000 of them go to Montego Bay alone, notwithstanding it. And we ourselves in the Bahamas issue warnings on an annual basis to Bahamians traveling to Miami to be careful how they move around South Florida, because there have been instances where people have been robbed in South Florida. I advised colleagues last year that the Bahamas watches closely the policies of its closest trading partner and neighbor, the United States of America. And the United States President has made two important social policy statements within this present term, which form the core of U.S. foreign policy. One is an interest in the question of trafficking in persons. The other he has called the issue of LGBT rights, the defining civil rights issue of our time. That's the United States President. You will be aware that this country receives millions of dollars in military assistance that, given the way American foreign policy works, human rights abuses may lead to cutbacks in that assistance mandated by law. So, as we shape our social domestic policies, we are always cognizant of that fact. We don't have to like it or agree with it. The fact is that is the way they operate, and while there's no instant threat of that, it is the job of the foreign minister to guard against any such issue arising and to be proactive in doing so. Last week, the United States President issued the following statement with regard to LGBT issues in Uganda. He said, the anti-homosexuality bill in Uganda, once law, will be more than an affront and a danger to the gay community in Uganda. It will be a step backward for all Ugandans and reflect poorly on Uganda's commitment to protecting the human rights of its people. It also will mark a serious setback for all those around the world who share a commitment to freedom, justice, and equal rights. Mr. Obama said that if the President of Uganda signs the bill, which will criminalize homosexual behavior in Uganda, it will complicate the relationship between that country and the United States, putting at risk some $400 million U.S. of aid annually to that country. There are many here who would say, well, let them do so when it comes to us. But what I know, Mr. Speaker, is this, that if in the Progressive Liberal Party, on our watch, did anything which resulted in the Bahamas losing aid from the United States of America, they will say the PLP caused us to lose the aid. And you'll never hear the end of it. Now, the opposition spokesman said the following in the press yesterday. Minister Mitchell is our Minister Mitchell is our foreign affairs minister when he goes away to represent us. Is that the position of the government? Fred is entitled to his views and opinion, but he can't share them on a public stage when representing the country, especially on such controversial issues. Now, the intent of the statement is homophobic. It is what Andrew Allen called a dog whistle. Knowing his Catholic upbringing, Mr. Speaker, I am surprised. Because what it does, and what it may have been, it may not have been intended to do, but what it does in this country is the following. It unleashes a torrent of abusive language at me.
Member rises on a point of order. The chair recognizes the member for East.
It's his opinion that I am homophobic, not that I am. It's a homophobic statement.
Very well. Thank you. Member for Folkestone, the member indicates that he...
And that's not the allegation I'm making. The allegation I'm making is that we have to be careful with language. That's all. Because knowing how this thing is such a hot-button issue in the country, imagine now what my sister, this one and that, thinks in the context of this. With this torrent of abusive language that has now been unleashed against me, with these scatological comments that are completely without merit. Some of the things that have been written about me, Mr. Speaker, over this simple statement in Trinidad, which broke no new ground. If a white man had gotten up and called someone a nigger, people would have been outraged at it. And yet, people in this society can think it is acceptable to use these nasty, filthy, bad, vile words with impunity on the grounds of their moral beliefs. It is outrageous, and it's unacceptable, and I will not stand for it. I say this in the context of a report which appeared in yesterday's paper on the death of Gilbert Bay, Jr., I think his name. He's 14 years old. There was a headline, and the Guardian headline said that he had died while preparing to deal with bullies. I saw in the newspaper where the Royal Bank of Canada gave a gift for the anti-bullying campaign. And this is an emerging issue in this country. People being called names in the kind of atmosphere that we have, what is the favor of the people who bully, to pick on people who are smaller or appear weaker than themselves, and then seek to stigmatize them by calling them names which we can't repeat in here. No child deserves that, Mr. Speaker. And I'm glad that there's an effort to stop it. And I'm writing this piece. I hadn't even remembered this. But I'm writing this piece. At the time I was writing this piece, I recall my own experience when I was junior at Eastern Junior, which is now called Palmdale Primary. Now here I am, a model student, no issues as far as academics are concerned. But every afternoon when I walked home from school to Collins Avenue, I was in mortal terror as I tried to make my way home to Collins Avenue, because there was a girl who took a shine to me for some reason and followed me, hitting me in my head with a rock, punching me, calling me names, and several times. Well, that's often psychologists say that that's how it works itself out. That's how it works itself out. Right? Now, I appealed to my parents, so I'm a little boy. It would stop for a while, but in short order, after they spoke to her parents, it would stop for a while, and then it would begin again. And it did not end until I left to go to private school. And what I'm saying now as a public official, no public official, and any of us in here, should be a part of supporting that kind of effort against anybody. You can disagree with me about my statements, about this and so on and so forth, but a way to do this in a civil atmosphere. So I'm quite surprised at this. Particularly since the opposition spokesman says he has no problem with my views. It's easy to pick on people, Mr. Speaker, easy to pick on people who you don't like because they don't fit the mold. You attack their nationality, you attack their color, their skin size, their orientation, anything to diminish somebody. So what I'm going to do, I'd like to lay the entire statement delivered in Trinidad on the table for the edification of members. I have copies for everybody. Because all I did on that day in Trinidad was to describe the current state of affairs in the Caribbean as I understand it on this issue. No more, no less. As a matter of fact, I sanitized this to such an extent as to say I have no remit to pronounce on any policy matters in connection with this. And it's not just like a live issue. I'm saying the United States government is at us with this every day. I just met with the charge here on Monday. Long conversation about this and how it fits within the policies of the Bahamas government. I know what the Bahamas government's policies are. What I do know is in 1991, this House unanimously passed a bill which decriminalized behavior which is connected with sexual orientation. Decriminalized it. So it's not a crime in this country. That I know. I also described the fact that the Prime Minister of Barbados spoke to the Anglican Synod last year at its provincial synod, in which he raised this matter as an issue. I know also that the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis says that a public discussion has to ensue in his country on this issue. So, my bottom line was simply this, that let the discussion continue. But let us also be mindful of the general rights of the Charter which we subscribe to in this country. The Civil Society Charter, which is tolerance and respect for everybody's rights, that you don't be abusive to people. And I'm saying that because someone has a different orientation for you does not give you the right to abuse that person. That's all I said. No more, no less. And that suddenly becomes, as Andrew Allen says, a dog whistle. One difficulty I have is that the member apparently does not remember what his own party's stand is on this matter and what the agreed policy is with regard to this matter with Parliament. I want to read, I went back and I want to read what Hubert Ingram said in 1998 on this subject. I'll read it. This is what he said. Hubert Ingram, the leader and then Prime Minister of the country. This is what he said. And I quote, "I have been chilled by the vehemence of the expressions against gay persons made by some in our newspapers and over radio talk shows. Admittedly, there have been expressions of reason and understanding on this matter on the editorial pages, but these have been largely lost in a sea of bitter, poorly reasoned diatribe." Hubert Ingram goes on, "I do not believe that the future of the Bahamas will be placed in danger because chartered cruises by gay persons are permitted to contribute to call at Bahamian ports. The future of the Bahamas is not threatened by foreign persons of homosexual orientation. Homosexuality is not a contagious disease. It is not a crime in the Bahamas." Hubert Ingram. He goes on, "Insofar as family life is concerned, studies conducted in developed nations around the world, most notably in North America and Western Europe, maintain that homosexuals are born and raised by well-adjusted, loving heterosexual parents, and that well-adjusted homosexuals are given birth to and raised well-adjusted heterosexual children. While research has not been conducted in the Bahamas, the results would very likely be quite similar among Bahamians." Hubert Ingram. And I quote again, "An individual's right to privacy is a basic human right cherished by all people. It is a right which citizens of democratic countries expect to be respected by their government." That's the end of the quote. Now, following the free national movements, the following thing happened after that, Mr. Speaker. The Free National Movement Administration, with Brent Simonet in the chair as Minister of Foreign Affairs, voted at the United Nations to condemn violence against gay people. We supported it when they asked us about it. So again, I ask, by making the statements that I did in Trinidad, what new ground was broken? What personal view did I espouse? And then go on to suggest that what I'm doing is abusing the money of the public purse? That's simply outrageous. The late Archdeacon Thompson said in an argument with an English priest on this subject, who was vehemently against him, he said, what caused him to pause? Because then the priest said, yes, but what if you're wrong? And what if just like the color of your skin is what it is, and I can do nothing about what I am, then you are condemning me for the way I was made? And that's what Archdeacon said caused him to pause. It is important for this country to just get over this, you know? When I was in the States a few weeks ago, I spoke to a Bahamian female who was married a woman. Her family is struggling with this issue here in Nassau. But as I spoke to the parents, I said to them, you can't cut off the child. You can't do it. That's your child, good or ill. Your child. And people, I never remember a speech made by my honorable friend here when she said, people are fortunate to have children. Fortunate. It's a blessing to have children. Many people can't have them. And to cut off someone because of that is simply not right. I don't have anything else to say. I will lay on the table the revenue performance of the department and the Ministry for the edification of the public. And I'll make available to the opposition spokesman any information regarding details of expenditure and revenue if he feels that he needs such detail. I would only say that expenditure in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Immigration has been kept within limits. You will see that the revenue is $7,000 has been collected. And the total forecast revenue for the year is $46,233,000, and it looks like we'll be able, on this pace, to make that target. The foreign affairs side, which includes authentication of notaries, issuance of visas, passport fees, and the rental for Ortec up to the 31st of December, shows a collection of $12,391,844 up to December of last year. I believe there's considerable scope for raising passport, visa, and notary fees, and we continue to work with the Ministry of Finance. We're also working on with the Ministry on fees for immigration and the Ministry of Financial Services on fees for immigration, especially given the fresh demand for the right to live in the Bahamas as permanent residents. Last year, Mr. Speaker, when I was speaking on the mid-year budget on the 11th of March, 2013, I said the following. The Cabinet has asked that we work in conjunction with the Department of Labor and the National Training Program so that within a year we will be able to stop issuing work permits for maids, housekeepers, and laborers. I say this only as a warning shot about what is likely to come. I also say this in the presence of MPs because of what you can expect in the way of a significant pushback from the business community if the policy is implemented and the attendant political costs therefrom. That was on the 11th of March last year. Now, this caused great consternation and angst in some quarters. If you remember, again, the sky was going to fall down, the country was going to collapse, you weren't going to be able to get your maid, and this one couldn't get their person to work for the newspaper, and there was a double-page editorial. Yeah, double-page editorial. And I described them then, Mr. Speaker, as the usual suspects. Here we go again. Immediately, one of the newspaper publishers went into overdrive, predicting that the sky would fall in. Of course, in the year, the sky has not fallen in. We're still here, and we expect the sun to come up tomorrow. Since that time, though, the Bahamas National Training Agency has initiated a program to assist workers to get into the workplace. But it's taken a while to get it up and going, and we're not where we want to be in terms of the training of domestics. But the matter continues to be under review by the department with increased scrutiny. What I'm hoping to do is to be able to report to the House with a more definitive position when we meet to debate this matter of the annual budget in June. In other words, it is still the objective of the immigration department to be able to guide the workforce and our demands in the workforce in such a place that Bahamians will have primacy even in these jobs at entry level of domestics, laborers, housekeepers, maids. Suffice it to say, Mr. Speaker, that it remains the principle of the department working with the Department of Labor to increase opportunities for Bahamians to work in their own country. And I'm particularly sensitive to issues relating to developments in Bimini and on Cable Beach. I'm so far pleased with these developments, but I want to say to them that this principle, any application which comes before us in immigration, is going to be subject to this principle of Bahamians first. it's a difficult issue to deal with, because I'm perplexed increasingly by the undertone of so many developers in this country that Bahamians can't do the work. You know, one particular man, I'm told, does this with the Department of Labor. He advertises to Bahamian laborers, say carpenters and so on and so forth, that you can come work for me and I'll pay you $12 an hour. Then on your first paycheck, he says, "Sir, I'm not going to pay you $12 an hour. I can only give you $6 an hour." Whereupon the Bahamian quits. And then he goes to the Ministry of Labor and says, "I can't find Bahamians to do the work." Owes the Department of Immigration plenty of money now, and they're vexed with us, but, you know, we try to keep on top of those situations. This psychology has to change. And what also has to change is the trust which the Bahamian people put in the Department of Immigration and the Department of Labor. Very often we hear about something after the fact, when employees would know what is going on a job site and never come and tell us. But I can assure you that even where someone gets a work permit, if it comes to our attention that that work permit holder is, for example, being abusive toward Bahamians, we call them in and say, you know, hey, catch yourself. We're not going to have Bahamian workers abused. And in the main, the employers have been working with us on this issue. Now, the most vexing issue which is developing now is this one with the domestic banking sector. And I've met with the chair and managing director of Scotiabank, and we'll be calling the director of First Caribbean and the Royal Bank of Canada, because I want to find out what they're doing. I'm concerned with recent developments of what appears to be the targeting of employees following a stricter immigration enforcement, and I want to do my best to disabuse the department of the notion that this is what is intended by these downsizing operations. Now, tangentially, the leader of the banking union indicated in a TV interview that one of the reasons the Bahamian worker does not have the mobility to move with the now closed departments to the Caribbean is because we didn't sign on to the single market and economy. Well, I thought that was an interesting statement. But you will all recall my fight for that and what I thought was the best interest of the Bahamas, which goes back to the earlier statements I had made. You know, I could be involved in unpopular policies and all the rest of that. But I'm looking down the road because I don't want anything to happen which is adverse to this country. So I try to spot what I consider best for the country and advise accordingly. That's all I can do. Bahamian people say, to heck with you. Well, that's the way it goes. But you have to give your best advice, even though that advice is unpopular. You know, I thought there was no cost to it. There was all an upside. But, you know, democracy being what it is what it is. And, of course, I speak Greek. Just want to talk about the repatriation of illegal migrants, which continues to be a challenging problem for this country. I was telling the member for Pinewood yesterday. I think he's got a good future with us. You know, real sharp mind and all that. And he surprised me because I was telling him that in this job, I have had the good fortune over the weekend to spend 3 days with Henry Kissinger, and just talk to him about various policies. And so he said, "Kissinger, gee, you know him," and so on and so forth. I'd like to meet him, and I was saying to him, it's difficult for me sometimes to predict what the next generation actually wants, believes, thinks about. But I bring that up in the context of the conversation when Mr. Kissinger just asked me, what is the issue, foreign policy issue of the Bahamas? I said the most vexing problem, if I were to put one subject, is the question of illegal migration. Because we don't really have the mechanism to solve it, and the world doesn't seem to appreciate that there is an illegal migration problem in the Bahamas. And sitting around the table was Richard Haas, who is the chair of the Council on Foreign Relations, and Princess Michael of Kent, another group, a lot of people, and none of them were aware that Bahamas has a Haitian migration problem. So, illegal migration continues to be a tortuous and difficult issue for us. Now, on the 5th of November 2013, a new team commenced Operation Cleanup Bahamas, the focus of which is to target construction sites, roadblocks in the east and the west, food stores, gas stations, shanty towns, inland areas, and New Providence, to apprehend illegal migrants who have contravened the immigration laws. Since the introduction of this operation on the 5th of November 2012 to the 17th of February 2013, a total of 676 migrants were arrested. These included 575 Haitians and 101 other nationals. These are migrants who were detained, the majority of whom have now been repatriated. The operations were successful in arresting migrants who were granted work permit approvals, but the work permit fees were delinquent. And the operations resulted in collecting in excess of $200 million in delinquent fees. The breakdown of persons repatriated as follows: from January to December 2012, 638 other nationals, 2,496 Haitians, for a total of 3,134 people in 2012. From January to December 2013, there were 835 other nationals and 3,033 Haitians, for a total of 3,868 people. And from January to February, of the 18th of February 2014, 53 other nationals and 357 Haitians, for a total of 410. And I would guess that the other nationals are mainly made up of Cubans, and we've had discussions with both the Cuban government and the American government because we see a significant bump up in the number of Cuban migrants that are coming through the Bahamas, and we're trying to figure out why that is. The Americans have told us that their intelligence suggests that this is a phenomenon around the Caribbean and not just related to us, because they notice increases in Puerto Rico as well. The Cuban government says that it's driven largely by the wet foot, dry foot policy of the United States of America, which allows any Cuban who lands in the United States to be able to become a resident of that country. Repatriation costs, and they're mainly by air, from January to December 2012, the cost was $1,048,365,049. And from January to December, January to December 2012, $1,048,365,49. And from January to December 2013, it was $1,191,250.27. In terms of illegal boat landings, from January to December 2012, 1,477 illegal boat landings. And from January to December 2013, 1,899 illegal boat landings. 1899. So we continue to work on this problem of migration. Mr. Speaker, I wish now to turn to other matters which touch and concern the policy of finance in the country. I spoke briefly at the start of this assault on the Bank of the Bahamas by the Punch and Ivan Johnson, and it appears with the aid and comfort of the opposition there is a full-scale assault on the Bank of the Bahamas. The Minister of Finance has said that it stands by the bank. What we want to do is to avoid a run on this bank, Mr. Speaker, which would be ruinous for this country. And I often wonder, when I see all this commentary in public, if that is not what people are actually trying to do. If they are, what would be the profit in that? We know that some of the people who run these newspapers are sick miscreants, and it's their business to make money off people suffering. Yeah, I claim it. What is the aim then? That's the newspapers, but what is the aim of the opposition in the matter? The Bank of the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, is owned by the Bahamian people. The Bank of the Bahamas is owned by the Bahamian people. Or is it the intention of the Free National Movement to do to the Bank of the Bahamas what they did to the Bahamas Telecommunications Company Limited? I'm looking forward to the examination by the Parliamentary Select Committee on BTC to find out what went on, who got what, and who did what. The chair of the committee, Mr. Franklin Wilson, to recover the 2% of the shares in BTC for the Bahamian people, says that what we actually got was $100 million out of the deal when we were told we would get $210 million. Now, if that is so, that has to be explained to the Bahamian people. It must be explained how the wicked, evil one, with his insidious and viperous hand, put a poison pill in the deal, deliberately to prevent a future government from reversing the matter by imposing a penalty of $100 million if any future government did that. Or is what they propose to do to the Bank of the Bahamas what they did to the Bahamian people at Arawak Key and the port development, which has imposed a monopoly on the Bahamian people with usury pricing that has driven up the cost of freight and commerce in this country. About the underlying story of the Bank of the Bahamas is a bank, Mr. Speaker, that is in relatively good shape. It reported a loss for the first time in its history, but then so did Finco, and so at one time did Commonwealth Bank. Everybody had their losses. In fact, few people may recall this, but the Central Bank of the Bahamas had to step in at one point in the history of Commonwealth Bank to save the bank from going under. Talk about too big to fail. You know, central banks have to make these decisions all the time, but the Bank of the Bahamas is nowhere near that. And the Bahamas government is committed to the Bank of the Bahamas. And I predict that its management will overcome any challenges that it now faces. Is the FNM making the allegations about investigations into the bank to look into the, so that we can look into their stewardship of their board of directors, since they were there for the 5 years that the loans about which they now complain were given? So are they asking us to uncover what they did? There is no profit, Mr. Speaker, in trying to cause a run on this bank. Minister of Foreign Affairs, I'm often out of the country, and I always need to be tethered to the country. It's what I said in the opening statement about the need to always be in touch with the Prime Minister, or most often the Deputy Prime Minister acts as Foreign Minister, to be in touch with what is happening, so that you know that you are securely an agent of this country. Most often this is by phone or by the web. I'm quite concerned, and I've raised this with my colleagues, about the poor service which the telephone company and cable companies give this country. And just to stick with the telephone company now, dropped calls, poor quality lines. There's apparently so much crowding on the system that there's a high level of failed calls and going to voicemail. Sometimes I'd be speaking to the Prime Minister or the Deputy Prime Minister, and the call is interrupted in the space of 40 seconds, 3 or 4 times. Other times, you simply can't get through. If this had been any other country, it would have been a scandal of momentous proportions. And, Mr. Speaker, public relations cannot replace good service and a good product. We have a place on the board, and I've asked the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to make specific approaches to our directors on the board, the management of the company, and the Utilities Regulatory Competition Authority on this matter. And the thing that most shocks me, we have in the gallery Joy Newbold, who is a Foreign Service officer, about to go off to New York. She was with me in Trinidad. And, you know, I'm helpless when it comes to these so-called smartphones, so she had to turn off the data roaming because it's just outrageous. Every 5 seconds you appear to get this message saying you got $100, you got $25, you got $50. I mean, what is this for a service that you're not even using? And I know a bit about it because there was an American who wanted to come and invest in, as soon as the market is liberalized, and he was telling me that there is no relationship between the cost of the service of roaming and the charges which these phone companies actually impose upon you. It is simply usury and outrageous. So, that's why I support wholeheartedly the decision by the government to hold this parliamentary inquiry into CPC. The sale resulted not only in the loss of an asset to the Bahamas, but has resulted in poor quality service, poorer than ever before in the history of our country. It has been a lose-lose situation. There's only one man to blame for this, and he must be called into account for it. Mr. Speaker, it's been an enormous pleasure and honor, privilege, a rare favor to serve as Minister of Foreign Affairs, and more particularly as Member of Parliament for the Fox Hill constituency, and to be once again able to speak today. And so I say, in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Ghost.
Amen.
Will be done.